we're going to get to our first guest.
Gary Flynn.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to right now our Flint's very own historian, Mr. Gary Flynn.
Yay, Gary!
Thank you, Mark. Now, as Mark mentioned, the Creative Line show is on Comcast Channel 17, Monday nights at 6 and Wednesday nights at 7, which is the repeat of the Monday broadcast. Last week, actually, I should say last Monday, the Creative Line show on Comcast did a segment of last month's Collab night, where I did my Paramount potato chips piece.
Yes, it was the last half.
And I had hinted at last month's Collab night that I would be working on my ambitious piece about the General Motors cutbacks in Flint. Well, it's been written.
Okay.
So here's my lost industry piece on General Motors downsizing. Flint's economy over time rose and fell with the state of the automotive industry, which was the unfortunate result of Flint's economy being dependent on the automotive industry in general and General Motors in particular, which was born in Flint. But 1973 was the year when things began to gradually change, causing adverse effects to the people of Flint. 1973 was the year of the Arab oil embargo, which changed the automotive marketplace, in which car buyers were beginning to switch to more fuel-efficient vehicles, leaving the domestic automotive industry and General Motors unprepared. GM was also having reliability problems with their vehicles, as they were averaging nearly $500 million in annual warranty repairs. They also fell behind foreign automakers regarding new emission rules. This allowed European automakers such as Volkswagen, as well as Japanese automakers, to increase their market share in America, slowing GM profits and laying the groundwork for GM's forthcoming downsizing of the manufacturing capacity in the Flint area. These are the GM factories in the Flint area, in the order that demolition was completed, which were affected. First, the AC Sparkplug Industrial Avenue plant. After losing control of the Boston-based Champion Sparkplug Company, which moved to Toledo, Ohio, Albert Champion moved to Flint at the invitation of GM founder Billy Durant to establish the Champion Ignition Company in 1908, which was initially based in a portion of the third floor of the Buick factory on Hamilton Avenue. The following year, it moved to its own two-story factory at the corner of Industrial Avenue and Harriet Street. In 1912, Champion greatly expanded the factory, which was expanded further in 1915 and 1918. It eventually occupied both sides of Industrial Avenue between Page, with two overhead walkways linking the factories, and totaling 470,000 square feet on Industrial Avenue between Page and Harrison Streets. Because the Champion Sparkplug Company owned the Champion name, Albert Champion renamed the company AC Sparkplug after its initials in 1922. In 1925, Champion acquired the Dort Motor Company factory on North Dort Highway. Champion died in 1927. In 1929, GM acquired Champion's interest in the company from his estate, and in 1933 it officially became a division of GM. AC over time phased in production at the expanding Eastside factory complex, and over time phased out portions of the Industrial Avenue factory complex until it closed in 1975, when it was torn down later that year, with demolition extending into 1976. Buick took over the site for parking. Now for Fisher 1. In 1921, GM founder Billy Durant, after losing control of GM for the last time, founded Durant Motors, and the following year broke ground on a new factory on Flynn's southeast side at South Saginaw Street between Afton and Hemp Hill Roads to build a car called the Flint, which would compete with Buick. A production at the $50 million factory began in 1923, but it proved to be too big for the volume of business, so it was sold to GM for $4 million in 1925 and became Fish Body Plant number 1. It built bodies for Buick, which were then trucked to Buick on Flint's north side for final assembly. In 1984, GM changed its organizational structure, and the Fish Body number 1 plant became the Buick Oldsmobile Cadillac, or BOC Group, Flint Body Assembly Plant. Renovations and changes to the Northside Buick complex to compete with global automakers led to the development of Buick City, inspired by the Toyota City complex of factories in Japan. The switch to unibody construction and front-wheel drive new Buicks in 1985 made the BOC Flint Body Assembly Plant expendable. The plant then shifted to building bodies for rear-wheel drive Buick Regal, Chevrolet Monte Carlo, and the Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme models for the Chevrolet-Pontiac/GM Canada, or CPC plant in Pontiac. But the closing of that assembly plant in Pontiac sealed the fate of Old Fisher 1. The plant closed in December 1987. The closing was an inspiration for Michael Moore's first film, Roger and Me. After partial demolition and renovations, the site became the Great Lakes Technology Center. Only the old factory's administration building maintained its original exterior. Now for the Fisher Coldwater Road Plant. The Fisher Body Coldwater Road Plant in Genesee Township opened in 1953 and was built for the Buick Motor Division. The original plan was to build aircraft engines for the Korean War, but the end of that war led to the plant, still in construction at that time, be turned over to GM's Turnstead Division and used for civilian production of body hardware. The Detroit-based Turnstead Manufacturing Company developed the first dependable closed-car window regulator. By 1920, Turnstead was a subsidiary of Fisher Body, which became a wholly owned subsidiary of GM in 1926, making Turnstead a GM division. Turnstead was absorbed into Fisher Body in 1969. The 1.8 million square foot plant employed 1,900 people and produced power and manual window regulators, door and deck lid hinges, and headliners. GM's 1984 organizational structure dissolved Fisher Body, and the Coldwater Road plant became part of GM's new Fisher Guide Parts division. In 1989, Fisher Guide merged with GM's Inland division to become GM's Inland Fisher Guide division. Inland Fisher Guide became part of GM's spin-off Delphi Automotive Systems in 1995. The following year, Delphi sold the plant to Peregrine Inc., but the Coldwater plant was unprofitable and it closed in 1998. It was torn down shortly afterwards, leading to estimated losses of $1 million in tax revenue. A landfill behind the former site is being monitored for groundwater contamination. Now for Buick City. In 1898, Billy Durant of the Durant Door Carriage Company purchased the 220-acre William Hamilton farm from his daughter, Mrs. Minnie Loringer, for $22,000. In 1907, Durant's new three-story factory for his Buick Motor Company was built, consolidating manufacturing from factories in Jackson, Michigan, and west of downtown Flint. That became the start of what would become a sprawling complex of factories on Flint's north side. Buick was the beginning leading to the formation of General Motors by Durant in 1908, which was also the year that the Buick plant became the largest automobile factory in the world. Over the years, additional factories were built on the site, and in the reorganization of the Buick factory complex in the mid-1980s, the sprawling site from Pearson Road to the north, the CSX railroad tracks to the east, Harriet Street to the south, and Industrial Avenue to the west would be called Buick City. But by the 1980s, Buick sales were declining rapidly. In 1997, it was announced that Buick City would close. On June 29, 1999, a Buick LeSabre was the final car to roll off the Buick City assembly line. Demolition of the complex would begin afterwards. A few factory buildings, manufacturing engines and transmissions, plus support buildings north of Lee Street, were saved to become GM Powertrain Flint North Complex. Now for Fish in the Hole / Fisher Guide / AC Flint West. For a century and a half, beginning in 1865, a site west of downtown along the Flint River was an industrial area. From the processing of lumber up through wagon and carriage building, culminating into an automotive manufacturing complex, what became known as Chevy in the Hole by 1934 covered 80 acres and employed 14,000 workers at 31 factories on both sides of the river. An overhead tunnel above Chevrolet Avenue became a local landmark, topped on both sides by Chevrolet's bow tie sign in neon. But activity began winding down in 1984 by the closing of Plant 4, which was the engine plant. That same year, a General Motors reorganization led to the complex becoming part of the CPC group. When the complex was taken over by GM's Fisher Guide division by 1986, the bow tie signs came down and were moved to the Vic Canaver Chevrolet dealership in Fenton. In 1987, AC took over the complex, and Delphi took over in 1995. Vacant buildings were torn down one by one, beginning in 1995 with the old Fisher Body No. 2 plant. The powerhouse was demolished in 1999, with the twin smokestacks imploded on March 6. Delphi Plant 10 and the water treatment plant were demolished in 2003. The repurposed Delphi Plant 4 was the last building closed on July 2, 2004, and demolition began shortly afterward. But Delphi did not remove equipment and confidential medical records before demolition began, so demolition exposed everything for all to find, which the Uncommon Sense Alternative newspaper reported in 2005. Kettering University took over the site north of the river for campus expansion, and Kettering's GM Mobility Research Center now occupies part of the site. Kettering also took over Plant 35, which after renovations became the CS Mott Engineering and Science Center. The city of Flynn took over the site south of the river, which after brownfield cleanup became parkland called Chevy Commons. One GM manufacturing facility remains in operation. The old Plant 38 on Stevens Street is now Flint Tool and Die. Now for the GM Powertrain V8 engine plant. Part of Shelby Motors Division's post-World War II expansion, the V8 engine plant was built in 1953 on Vance Lake Road southwest of Flint. At that time, each GM division had its own engine manufacturing operations. That changed in 1984 with GM's first reorganization, with the Vance Lake engine plant part of the CPC group, which was combined with the BOC group's engine operations in 1990 to form the GM engine division. That was combined with GM Hydromatic division, which made transmissions in 1990, creating GM Powertrain. In 1999, GM Powertrain closed the V8 engine plant, and it was replaced by the new Flint Engine South plant, just south of the V8 engine plant, which was demolished shortly afterwards. A paint shop addition to the GM Flint assembly plant now occupies the site. Now for GM Powertrain Flint North. When most of the Beery City complex was closed down, the remaining buildings north of Lee Street, which made automotive components, were saved. The oldest surviving factory building was built in 1926/1927 as Factory 70, which served as a foundry until 1980. It was remodeled in 1980/81 and renamed Factory 81, which made transmission components, pistons, and torque converter vanes. The other factories in the complex were Factory 36, which was engine component manufacturing assembly, Factory 10, which was transmission and engine component manufacturing, and Factory 5, which was transmission component and hinge manufacturing. Support buildings were Building 18, which was personnel, hospital, and the fire department, Building 21, which was machine shop and tool bean grind, Building 22, which was the powerhouse behind Factory 10, Building 55, which was the waste treatment, Building 86, which was the Wolfeis Facilities Group, and what was left of Factory 3, which was renovated into the Cultural and Diversity Center, which opened in 2004. But in 2008, the final 3.8-liter V6 engine was built on the site. At that time, Flint North employed more than 1,200 workers. 2 years later, the rest of the complex, employing 400 workers, was closed. This brought to an end a century of manufacturing at what became Buick City, where in the mid-1950s, 29,400 employees worked there. The remaining buildings were torn down afterwards. And finally, AC Flint East. As already mentioned, Albert Champion acquired the Dort Motor Company plant on North Dort Highway in 1925 for its AC spark plug factory. After Champion died in 1927, GM acquired his interest in the company, taking over in 1929 and becoming a GM division in 1933. Over time, the factory complex on North Dart Highway would sprawl eastward all the way to Center Road uninterrupted and even extended to Burton. After AC took over the former Chevy and the Holt factories in 1987, which became AC Flint West, this complex became known as AC Flint East. In 1988, GM merged the AC Spark Plug division with the Rochester Products division to to form AC Rochester, which was initially based at Flint East before the headquarters was moved to the Great Lakes Technology Center. Another GM divisional consolidation led to the formation of AC Delco Systems in 1994. The following year, it was absorbed in the GM spin-off company Delphi Automotive Systems, which was separated from GM in 1999. Delphi's bankruptcy in 2005 included plans to close most of its American plants, including Flint East. The decline in employment at the Flint East complex had been gradual, from around 7,000 in 1996 to 3,500 in 2003 to about 1,100 in 2008. In 2007, the engineering center at the corner of Davison Road and Averill Avenue was closed, with the job shifted to Auburn Hills. Demolition began on April 2008 of most of the Flint East complex, from North Highway eastward to Averill Avenue, including the power plant and engineering and research center. Before the historic factory at the corner of North Highway and Davison Road was raised, an expert of removing tiles carefully removed Flint faience tiles, including a Flint faience tiles tile sign from the facade of the factory in June 2008. The Adamo Group of Detroit was a demolition contractor which completed the demolition the following August of 2009. This left a large factory building that was built in stages extending from Averill Avenue to Center Road along Robert T. Longway Boulevard. That closed in 2013, when the remaining 287 employees was shifted to Mexico. The portion of the factory facing Center Road was demolished the following year. In 2017, the remaining part of the old factory on Averill and Longway was sold, and part of it is now used by Genesee Packaging. Since I wrote this, I also wrote pieces about the long-gone DuPont paint plant, which is across from Buick City. I already mentioned Paramount potato chips, and I also condensed the McDonald Dairy story, which I did write about in my Hidden History Flint book, and I just minted a piece about Hillmac products, which made lint rollers in Flint. In future Collab nights, I'll talk about those, but in the meantime, that's what I have right now, and I thank you very much.
That was very good, Mr. Flynn. That was very good.